Sometimes the breakthrough you've been waiting for is only one prayer away. Sometimes heaven is already leaning in your direction, already preparing the blessing, already opening the doors, and all God needs from you is the cry of a heart that refuses to give up. My friends, many of you today are standing on the edge of a financial miracle, and you don't even know it. You've been wrestling with the weight of overdue bills, the pressure of responsibilities, the fear of lack, the frustration of trying everything you know to do and still feeling stuck. But hear me, God is not late. God is not silent. God is not ignoring you. He has heard every whisper, seen every tear, and counted every sacrifice you made when nobody else was watching. And there are moments in life, deep, defining, unforgettable moments, when the right prayer releases the blessing that was already on the way. When the right cry from the heart unlocks doors you couldn't open on your own. When heaven responds not because you are perfect, but because you dared to believe again. You dared to stand again. You dared to trust again. I want to take you into 3 prayers that have released financial breakthrough for countless people. Prayers that rise from a place of surrender, faith, and divine expectation. There was a time when a man came to me broken, defeated, ready to give up on everything. His business had collapsed. His confidence was gone. His home was close to being taken from him. He felt like God had forgotten his name. And yet, with trembling hands and a broken voice, he whispered a prayer that changed everything. Lord, I can't, but you can. That simple cry shifted his entire situation. Not because the words were fancy, not because he had everything together, but because God responds to humility, because when you empty yourself, God fills the space. And my friend, in the months that followed, God restored everything he lost and more. His business rose again, not because of strategy, but because of surrender. Never underestimate the power of a prayer that says, God, I need you. The first prayer that unlocks breakthrough is the prayer of complete dependence. When you stop trying to be your own provider, your own defender, your own rescuer, and you handed it all over to the one who owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, something shifts in the unseen realm. God moves for people who acknowledge Him as their source. Heaven opens for the heart that says, Lord, it is you who gives and you who sustains. You see, provision was never meant to be carried on your shoulders alone. And when you release that burden and say, Father, I trust you more than my bank account, more than my job, more than my own abilities, you activate a divine supply line that never runs dry. The second prayer that releases financial breakthrough is the prayer of obedience. The kind of prayer that says, Lord, speak, and whatever you say, I will do. Many people pray for blessings, but few are willing to follow the instructions attached to the blessing. Sometimes God will whisper, give. Sometimes He'll whisper, save. Sometimes He'll whisper, invest. Sometimes He'll whisper, step out. And you may not understand the timing, the logic, or the reason, but God sees what you cannot. There was a widow who had only a handful of flour and a little oil left, enough for one final meal. But she obeyed the voice of God through the prophet. That obedience became the door to supernatural supply. She didn't enter abundance because she had plenty. She entered abundance because she obeyed when it was hard. I have seen people pray for money but resist when God tells them to release what is in their hand. I have seen people pray for opportunities but hesitate when God calls them to step into the unfamiliar. Breakthrough is not just about asking. It is about aligning. When your prayer shifts from Lord, bless me, to Lord, lead me, you step into a realm where God begins to trust you with resources, responsibility, and abundance. You cannot pray for financial breakthrough and live disconnected from the instructions of God. Obedience is the bridge between request and reward. The third prayer is the prayer of expectation. The prayer that refuses to doubt. The prayer that says, Lord, I believe you will do what you promised. There is something powerful about a believer who prays with expectation. Not arrogance, not entitlement, but holy confidence. The kind that says, you have never failed me before, and you will not fail me now. Expectation is faith with its shoes on. Expectation is hope standing tall. Expectation is trust that refuses to bow to fear. I remember a young woman overwhelmed with debt. Every letter in the mail made her heart sink. But one day she decided to pray differently. Not with fear, not with worry, but with expectation. She began to declare, Lord, you are my provider. You are my way maker. You are the God who brings streams out of deserts and water out of rocks. And she prayed it not once, not twice, but daily. She prayed until her fear broke. She prayed until her belief rose. And months later, through a series of events she didn't initiate, her debt was cleared completely. Not because she was lucky, but because she believed God for the impossible. My friend, when you pray with expectation, heaven takes notice. God moves where faith welcomes him. You do not need to see the whole path. Just believe that God is already on the way. Believe that something is shifting right now. Believe that even though you can't see it, God is aligning opportunities, opening doors, positioning people, and preparing the blessing. So hear this deeply. Breakthrough comes when dependence meets obedience, and obedience meets expectation. These three prayers are not magic formulas. They are postures of the heart. They are signals to heaven that you are ready, willing, surrendered, and aligned. And when a heart reaches that place, God does what only God can do. He multiplies, he restores, he surprises, he provides in ways that leave you saying, only God could have done this. Right now, some of you are standing one prayer away from the financial turnaround you've been crying for. One act of obedience away from the opportunity that will change your life. One moment of expectation away from the door that's about to swing wide open. Don't give up. Don't stop praying. Don't stop trusting. The same God who fed multitudes with a boy's small lunch, the same God who filled empty nets with overflowing fish, the same God who turned water into wine, he is still the God of abundance. He is still the God of breakthrough. He is still the God who makes a way where there is no way. Lift your eyes, lift your heart, lift your faith. Your financial breakthrough isn't just possible, it's on the way. There comes a moment in every person's life when they realize that their own strength is not enough, that their own plans are not working, and that their own resources cannot carry them through the storm they are facing. And it is in that moment, when the weight becomes too heavy and the answers feel too far away, that the heart learns the power of the prayer of complete dependence. This is not a prayer of defeat, it is a prayer of surrender. It is the kind of cry that reaches the deepest part of God's heart, because it comes from the deepest part of yours. When you say, Lord, I can't do this without you, heaven begins to move in ways you could never move on your own. So many people try to carry their financial burdens alone, trying to calculate their way out, strategize their way out, push their way out, and force their way out. They wake up tired, go to bed tired, and still feel like their efforts are not enough. But there is a truth you must understand. God never intended you to be your own provider. He never intended your job, your business, your intelligence, or your connections to be the foundation of your security. When you rely solely on these things, you live in constant anxiety because all of them can shift. But when you place your trust in the God who never changes, you step into a level of peace and provision that human effort can never create. The prayer of dependence begins when you recognize that God is the source of your strength, your opportunities, your ideas, your income, and your increase. It is the moment you acknowledge that everything good in your life comes from His hand. When you shift from saying, I've got to fix this. 2, Lord, you are my source. You realign your life with the flow of divine provision. You open space for God to act, to guide, to open doors, and to bring favor in ways you couldn't orchestrate even if you tried. There was a man who once thought he could handle everything alone. He prided himself on never asking for help, never showing weakness, never admitting fear. But when a financial storm hit his life, unexpected, crushing, overwhelming, his strength was no match for the reality he faced. He tried everything. He worked harder than ever. He sought solutions, but nothing changed. Finally, one night, in the quiet of his room, he fell to his knees and whispered the words he had avoided for years. Lord, I need you. That prayer turned his entire life in a new direction. Not because the words were dramatic, but because his heart finally yielded to the one who had been waiting to help him all along. When you pray from a place of dependence, you are not giving up. You are giving God room to be God. You are acknowledging that His ability exceeds your ability, His wisdom exceeds your wisdom, and His resources go far beyond anything you could ever gather. Dependence is not weakness, it is alignment. It is stepping into the truth that you were never designed to do this alone. You were created to walk with God, lean on God, trust God, and receive from God. Financial breakthrough often begins not with more work, more connections, or more opportunities, but with a deeper surrender of the heart. When you say, Lord, I trust you with what I cannot see, you activate a supernatural flow of provision that only faith can unlock. God responds to those who acknowledge Him as their provider. He responds to those who place their confidence not in the economy, not in the market, not in circumstances, but in His unfailing nature. When you depend on God, you shift your life from the limitations of human strength to the abundance of divine supply. The prayer of dependence also quiets fear. Fear thrives when you believe you are alone. Fear grows when you believe everything depends on you. But when you lay your worries before God and say, Father, you are in control, fear loses its power. Anxiety loosens its grip. Peace begins to rise. You stop waking up with dread and begin waking up with expectation because you know God is working even when you cannot see it. This kind of prayer opens doors that hard work alone cannot open. It brings opportunities that no resume can produce. It positions the right people in your path. It breaks cycles of lack and ushers in seasons of provision. When you depend on God, you stop living from crisis to crisis and start living from blessing to blessing. You stop striving in your own strength and begin walking in His supernatural rhythm. The prayer of complete dependence is not something you pray once. It is a lifestyle. It is waking up each morning saying, Lord, guide me, provide for me, lead me, strengthen me. It is choosing daily to trust God more than you trust what you see. It is choosing faith over fear, surrender over stress, reliance over self-sufficiency. Every time you pray this way, you draw heaven closer to your situation. Every time you pray this way, you remind your soul who your true provider is. Every time you pray this way, you activate the blessing that God has already prepared for you. The prayer of obedience is one of the most powerful catalysts for financial breakthrough because it moves you from simply asking God to actively aligning with Him. Many people pray for blessings, but fewer are willing to follow the instructions attached to the blessing. Yet Scripture again and again shows us that provision is often waiting on the other side of obedience. There are moments when God gives a quiet nudge, a gentle whisper, or a clear direction that doesn't make sense to the natural mind. It might challenge your comfort, stretch your faith, or require something from you that feels uncomfortable. But hidden inside that instruction is the miracle you've been praying for. Obedience is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is as simple as God prompting you to give when giving feels difficult, to save when saving feels impossible, or to step out when staying still feels safer. Sometimes obedience looks like applying for a job you think you're unqualified for, starting a business when the timing feels wrong, or releasing something you were holding on to tightly. God sees what you cannot. He knows what is ahead. When He asks you to obey, He's not trying to take something from you. He's preparing to release something to you. There was a widow in Scripture who had almost nothing left. A handful of flour, a little oil, and a plan to make one final meal before giving up. But God sent a word through a prophet that challenged everything she understood about survival. He told her to give out of the little she had. To the natural mind, it made no sense. But she obeyed, and her obedience opened the door to supernatural supply. The flour did not run out. The oil did not run dry. What looked like her final chapter became the beginning of a miracle simply because she followed the instruction. I have seen people pray passionately for financial change, but resist when God asks them to do something unfamiliar. They want the blessing without the step of faith. But financial breakthrough is not only about asking, it's about aligning your actions with God's direction. God rarely blesses where there is disobedience, not because He is unwilling, but because disobedience disconnects you from His flow. When you obey, you position yourself under the waterfall of His provision. Obedience sometimes feels risky, but it is never unsafe. God will never lead you into a place where His grace cannot sustain you or His favor cannot protect you. When He asks you to take a step, He has already prepared the ground beneath your feet. It may feel uncertain, but He sees the outcome. It may feel unreasonable, but He knows the miracle waiting on the other side. When you pray, Lord, whatever you say, I will do, you move into a posture where heaven can trust you with more. Consider the fishermen who had toiled all night with empty nets. Exhausted, frustrated, and ready to give up, they had nothing to show for their effort. But when Jesus told them to cast their nets again, they obeyed, even though it made no sense. Their obedience brought a breakthrough so great the nets began to tear. They had labored in their own strength and achieved nothing, but one act of obedience brought more than their efforts ever could. When you obey even when you don't understand, you invite God to work beyond your understanding. Obedience is also a test of the heart. It reveals whether you trust God's voice or your own reasoning. It shows whether you believe His plan or your fear. It exposes whether you want control or are willing to surrender control. Financial breakthrough is not just about money. It is about posture. A heart that obeys is a heart God can elevate, expand, and bless. When you obey, you are declaring, God, I trust you more than my logic, more than my emotions, more than my circumstances. There are times when God's instructions come in whispers, quiet, gentle stirrings in your spirit. Other times they come through opportunities, conversations, open doors, or even closed doors. But when you pray with a heart willing to obey, you become sensitive to His guidance. You begin to recognize His leading in ways you once overlooked. You see opportunities differently. You value resources differently. You make decisions differently. And in that shift, you step into the flow of divine provision. Obedience is not about perfection. It's about willingness. It's about saying yes even when you feel unsure. It's about taking the step even when you can't see the finish line. God does not require flawless obedience. He requires surrendered obedience. When you pray with a heart that says, Lord, lead me and I will follow, you invite God into the details of your financial life. You give Him permission to adjust, redirect, and reposition you for blessing. The prayer of obedience unlocks what hesitation keeps closed. It brings favor where fear once lived. It draws in opportunities that hard work alone cannot produce. When you obey, you align your life with heaven's instructions, and in that alignment, breakthrough finds you. The prayer of expectation is the kind of prayer that rises above fear, above doubt, above what your eyes can see, and declares that God is faithful even when nothing around you looks promising. It is the prayer that says, Lord, I believe you will do what you said, not because everything is perfect, but because you trust his character more than your circumstances. Expectation is not wishful thinking. It is faith that has matured. It is faith standing tall. It is faith refusing to bow to the pressure of lack, the noise of worry, or the lies of the enemy. When you pray with expectation, you are announcing to heaven and to your own soul that you believe God is already moving on your behalf. There is a difference between praying with hope and praying with expectation. Hope says, I wish things would change. Expectation says, I know God is working even now. Hope looks at the mountain and wonders if God will move it. Expectation looks at the mountain and knows God can move it, or take you over it, or make a path straight through it. Expectation doesn't wait for evidence. It stands on promises. It doesn't wait for signs. It stands on faith. It doesn't wait for circumstances to shift before believing. It believes until circumstances shift. There was a young woman overwhelmed by debt, burdened by financial pressure she never planned for. Every bill felt like another blow, and every day felt heavier than the last. But one day she decided to change the way she prayed. Instead of praying with worry in her voice, she prayed with confidence. Instead of praying while expecting disappointment, she prayed expecting God to show up. She began to speak his promises over her life. She reminded her own spirit of his faithfulness. She prayed not from a place of fear, but from a place of trust. And slowly, things began to change, not all at once, not overnight, but step by step. Opportunities opened. Unexpected provision came. Favor arrived in ways she could never have orchestrated. Her breakthrough began the moment she shifted from pleading to expecting. Expectation is powerful because it aligns your heart with what God is already doing. When you pray expecting God to move, you begin to notice doors that were always there but you couldn't see before. You begin to step into opportunities rather than stepping back from them. You begin to speak life instead of speaking defeat. You begin to act like someone who believes God is on their side, because he is. Expectation pulls you forward. It lifts your posture. It strengthens your spirit. It positions you to receive. Doubt, on the other hand, shuts the door. Doubt convinces you that the blessing isn't coming. Doubt blinds your eyes to the favor around you. Doubt keeps you stuck in cycles of worry and fear. But expectation breaks those cycles. It renews your mind. It reminds you of who God is. It shifts your focus from the size of the problem to the greatness of your provider. When you pray with expectation, your words begin to carry power because they are rooted in faith rather than fear. Expectation is not denial. It does not ignore reality. It simply refuses to make reality its master. It acknowledges the problem but chooses to trust the promise keeper. It sees the lack but believes in the God of abundance. It feels the pressure but stands on the God who brings peace. Expectation says, I don't know how, but I know who. And that is enough. When you pray with expectation, you activate a spiritual law as faith draws what it believes. A heart filled with expectation becomes a magnet for breakthrough. It attracts opportunities, opens doors, and invites favor. Expectation prepares you to receive what you've been praying for. It enlarges your capacity. It strengthens your resolve. It makes you ready for the blessing when it arrives. Think of a farmer who plants seeds. He doesn't plant with fear or doubt. He plants expecting a harvest, even when the soil looks dry, even when the sky looks empty, even when nothing has broken through the ground yet. He waters the soil, prepares for growth, plans for abundance, because he trusts the process and believes in the God who created it. That is expectation. Preparing for what you prayed for even before you see it. When you pray with expectation, heaven responds because expectation honors God. It tells God, I believe you are able. I believe you are willing. I believe you are faithful. And God always moves where faith is alive. When you look back over your life, you will see moments where God carried you, moments where He rescued you, moments where He opened doors you didn't even know to knock on. And just as He was faithful then, He is faithful now. The breakthrough you've been praying for is not beyond His reach. The financial shift you've been crying out for is not too difficult for His power. What He asks of you is not perfection, not performance, but posture. A heart that depends on Him, obeys Him, and expects Him to move. The 3 prayers you have walked through are not formulas, they are foundations. They shape the way you see God and the way you see your situation. The prayer of dependence brings you into a place of surrender where you release the weight you were never meant to carry. It reminds you that you have a provider who sees, who cares, and who responds. The prayer of obedience positions you for the blessing that is already prepared. It aligns your steps with His wisdom and places you on the path where favor flows. And the prayer of expectation fuels your faith, lifting your eyes from what is lacking to what God is capable of doing. It awakens hope where fear once lived, and it gives your spirit the courage to believe again. When these prayers come together, something powerful happens. You stop living as if you are alone. You stop fighting battles that are already in God's hands. You stop doubting the very things He has already promised. You begin to walk with a confidence that does not come from your bank account, your job, or your circumstances, but from the God who controls all of heaven's resources. You begin to live with the assurance that what is empty can be filled, what is broken can be restored, and what looks impossible can become your testimony. Breakthrough often begins in the quiet surrender, quiet obedience, quiet expectation. But its results are anything but quiet. They show up in restored finances, unexpected opportunities, divine connections, and provision that makes you say, only God could have done this. When you pray from the core of your being and align your life with His leading, you position yourself for the supernatural. No matter how long you've been struggling or how heavy the pressure feels, your story is not finished. God has a way of turning midnight moments into morning miracles. He has a way of taking what little you have and multiplying it. He has a way of opening doors that have been shut for years. And He has a way of surprising you at the very moment you think nothing is happening. Breakthrough is rarely instant, but it is always intentional. God is not slow. He is strategic. So stand firm in your dependence. Walk boldly in obedience. Pray fiercely with expectation. Let your heart rise again. Let your faith breathe again. What God has planned for you is greater than what you've lost, greater than what you fear, and greater than what you imagine. Your breakthrough is not just coming, it is already in motion.